Good evening and welcome to another episode of Cherie, the alternative and the avant-garde TV show that devoted to art, beauty, photography, music and much more. In general, devoted to life and the lifestyle. My name is Cherie Laurent, and I am going to be your host for tonight's episode. So please sit, relax, and let's enjoy our journey. Last week, we started very exciting and important subject was about globalization. And as the universe is so big, the subject was big, and we only have 26 minutes. So unfortunately, we got interrupted and I couldn't share with you all the beautiful information and the amazing fact that I wanted to share with you. So here we go again to globalization part 2. And tonight I will be taking you through the globalization market and also the globalization economy. It's a very important subject that affects every single one of us and also our children and generation to come. So I hope that you will enjoy the fact. I will step back and I will let my colleague do the narration because they will have a better English to explain to you, and hopefully you will get the most of the episode. Let's start tonight.
At the heart of the process of globalization is the rise of a new organizational paradigm in the form of the market system. A new logic of commercial exchange has expanded to ever more spheres of human activity. After millennia of societies and economies being governed primarily by people making choices within a political context, today economies around the world are less governed by the choices of their political institutions and more by the rules of economics, markets, and flows of financial capital. This truly radical transfer of power and decision-making has taken place within a few short decades with far-reaching implications. More and more societies around the world and more aspects of those societies become opened up to being organized through the logic of the market system. Centuries-old established local ways of doing things are becoming increasingly organized via global networks of economic exchange. Since the origins of society, people have formed political institutions to make collective decisions for their community. Tribes, chieftains, states, and empires have been governed predominantly by a small elite of people making collective decisions about the ordering of their societies and economies, with these political systems forming hierarchical, centralized structures based around a common culture and confined within a specific geographic boundary. The modern era saw the expansion of another major modality for the coordination and management of resources within society, the market system. Markets have always been there, but have traditionally operated within the confines and constraints of the cultural, social, and political institutions of their society. Typically, in pre-modern societies, most of the resources produced are for direct family consumption. Excess resources are typically aggregated and controlled by the ruling political authorities. Within these societies, markets play a relatively limited role in terms of decision-making. One of the primary characteristics of the modern era has been the rise of capitalism and the market system, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. With urbanization, mass production, and the specialization of labor, the mass of people became dependent on the capitalist market system for their everyday livelihood. In a modern society, the market system comes to take on a new role. Instead of being a means to an end that is controlled by the political, social, and cultural elite, it becomes an end in itself and increasingly liberated from socio-political constraints as an ever more important means for decision-making in relation to the allocation of resources. The economy becomes the glue that binds people together through their interdependence on each other. Through the process of industrialization, it becomes a major independent organizational structure. During this process of industrialization, it became accepted that the market system needs independence from socio-cultural and political control. Although this idea was challenged during the 20th century by centrally planned economies like the USSR, it eventually came to dominate. Until the middle half of the 20th century, hierarchies were almost unanimously seen as the only effective method for organizing production within large mass societies. It was at this time that a new ideology of the free market as a distributed coordination mechanism in its own right arose. One can see the early conceptual stages of this process with the work of Friedrich Hayek. Hayek recognized that prices produced by supply and demand alone could be an accurate and sufficient signal of information to allow decentralized coordination to achieve the optimal allocation of resources within society. Although the state was still seen to be needed for providing basic support, Hayek saw the market as an optimal self-sustaining system, and enabling it required converting as much as possible into private property and contracts that would allow for those signals to order economy spontaneously. The latter half of the 20th century saw the realization of Hayek's ideas here in the United States and in other developed economies, with the acceleration of a process of transferring socio-economic organization from hierarchical social organization to market structures. As promoted by a new ideology of neoliberalism in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, public provision started to retreat, and private production via the market started to expand into almost all areas. The neoliberal paradigm is the logic of the market system. Although originally it may have been an economic theory, neoliberalism came to be much more than this, as it came to encompass a set of ideas or paradigm about human nature, economic and social organization. Neoliberalism is the free market ideology based on individual liberty and limited government that connected human freedom to the actions of the rational, self-interested actor in the competitive marketplace. Neoliberalism formed the conceptual rationale for shifting economic organization from people and hierarchies toward an impersonal logic of the market. In order for it to achieve this, it had to remove power and capabilities from the nation-state. A battle was fought during the latter half of the 20th century for control over the state, and it was largely won by the proponents of this new market-based model. Neoliberalism had a clear agenda to shift power from democratic systems of governance and move it into the market. This was done through two primary vehicles. One was privatization and deregulation of national economies. The other method was the shifting of power out of national democracies and their parliaments and into the executive and international bodies that were not controlled via democratic procedures, such as the IMF or WTO. As people became increasingly aware that the political power to affect the things that mattered in their lives was fast slipping out of their hands, civil society started to react, clashing with the architects of this new global economy, the epicenter of which was here in Seattle on November 30th, 1999, where massive street protests turned mounting tensions into violent outbursts. However, the battle was already over. The days of the national democratic system exercising independent power were coming to a close, as all were becoming interdependent in a new market system that was starting to extend around the world. The ideological and regulatory playing field was now set for an unprecedented expansion in global economic activity, an era starting with the fall of the Berlin Wall that is now called hyper-globalization. Countries around the world began in earnest to industrialize their economies, bringing in country workers into urban centers to work in the low-skilled manufacturing of goods that could now be exported to global supply chains. Global trade agreements removed the limitations of the national economy as the world economy could absorb a much greater amount of production. This process of industrialization in China and other emerging markets drove huge growth in the global economy over this time. The expansion of telecommunication networks and the introduction of computerized coordination into the corporation enabled it to geographically disaggregate certain key aspects of production. Outsourcing expanded, creating greater exchange along the emerging global supply chains. More products and information were starting to move between more nodes, faster and at greater volume. The deregulation of financial institutions in the late 80s enabled the formation of a global financial architecture to move investment around the world. Foreign direct investment started to flow to emerging economies as money became relatively freely available within capital markets. This was the pinnacle of neoliberal economic globalization that took place during the 1990s and early 2000s, with the development of global supply chains and hyper-growth in China driving the commodity supercycle. This period of globalization drove dramatic changes around the world, in places like Dubai, Shenzhen, or here in Shanghai, as the city grew at 10% a year for 20 years. With its iconic skyscrapers appearing almost overnight, Shanghai will forever personify this period of globalization as the balance of power in the global economy changed substantially. This era marked the culmination of a centuries-long process in the shift of power and decision-making from political organizations to the markets and private enterprise. This period of extraordinary growth in the global economy all started unraveling over the course of a few months with the emergence of a global financial crisis. The well-accepted truths of economic development were shattered overnight. Everything became open to re-questioning, and an era of uncertainty began. The cold, hard realities of national divides and geopolitics came to once again prevail. in the history of globalization was over, and a period of searching began. When a new model for globalization was to emerge almost a decade later, it would take a very different form. The net result of this period of hyper-globalization is an economy that has evolved into a global form that is too complex for any nation-state or centralized organization to manage. In the space of just 2 decades, something profound had happened. Some kind of global system had emerged that was greater than any of its parts. After thousands of years of people being guided by ruling elite according to a multiplicity of local cultures and their different value systems, humanity is now embarked on an extraordinary process: the formation of a single global value system, a single logic for value exchange that is extending ever farther and ever deeper to replace the age-old structures that have organized societies for centuries. The form of hyper-globalization that expanded around the turn of the millennium was based on neoliberal economic theory. It was marked by a reduction in trade barriers, the development of outsourcing and global supply chains, the privatization of state assets, and the shift of power from national legislation to multinational institutions, the massive expansion of the global financial market, and the formation of the global cities network. But the financial crisis was to bring this massive expansion in economic exchange to a shattering end. The global flow of goods, finance, and services flattened. The well-accepted truths of the free market became reopened for questioning as multinational organizations like the IMF and World Bank have come to have less influence. Through the financial crisis, the political establishment in developed economies became increasingly delegitimatized as nationalism began to once again expand. While many speculated about the end of globalization, underneath the ashes, the seeds for the next era of globalization had already been sown, as a revolution in information technology was continuing unabated. The model for globalization was transforming. The globalization of today is no longer driven by increasing exchange of goods, but instead information and services. While political organization remains divided, soaring flows of cross-border data are taking global integration to new levels. As we approach 4 billion people connected to the internet, these huge flows of data and the platforms that orchestrate them have become the new architecture to globalization. The story of globalization as it has unfolded over the past decades has been one of a new set of information technologies, enabling the development of a global economic and financial system that brings humanity into a commonly shared value system mediated by markets. In the past, the linkage between the underlying information technology and the institutional structures that resided on them was not apparent. Globalization was seen to be driven by the institutional structure of the multinational corporation, of trade-free agreements.
That was all for tonight. I hope you did enjoy the amazing fact and the information from the globalization and the international market. I look forward to see you next week, and until next week, take care of yourself, the people you love, and the people around you. More love, more kindness, more understanding, more compassion. It will make the world a better place to live for you, for me, and for everybody. In the meantime, if you like to support me, please follow my Instagram, Cherie Laurent, LinkedIn, Cherie Laurent, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and Vimeo channel, which is vimeo.com /Masherie TV show. On this channel, you will find 8 series of the show, all being put there. Plus, a lot of the videos I do that I cannot put on TV for whatever reason. Probably they are a little bit too out there or too creative or too artistic. I put them there on Vimeo channel. So have a look. And also, I started a long time ago a project called Me by Me, which is taking a selfie, because I'm a professional photographer, so I decided to choose myself as a muse for a project based on a true story and a true book I saw in a bookshop in Sydney of an artist, a photographer, fall in love with a guy. She took photograph of him from the day she met him until the day he died. The last photo was his grave. And this book, when I was looking at it, it gave me goosebumps because it makes you see the process of aging and all what life threw at you in good and bad. And I thought maybe I will do this to myself too, and I have to commit to it. So you will see some photos are really crazy when I have crazy days, which is not a very good days, and when I have good days too. And that pushed me as an artist to be more creative, trying to come up with unusual stuff, unusual looks, unusual, just make it different every day and make it more artistic. And the photos is just getting better and better, and they are going more artistic and artistic, which I'm enjoying doing them, and I'm sharing them with a lots of people from all around the world. The United States and the French and the Swiss, those 3 countries, they are very excited about the project and they like it. Amsterdam too, and they follow it very well, and I always get lots of feedback on every photo. The photos become a muse to photographers and fashion designers, and that's what pushed me to keep changing. Like tonight, orange is the new black. Well, here I am in orange. Every day is a different color, every day is a different look. So until next week, I look forward to see you, and if you like to contact me, Cherie Laurent _@yahoo.com. Also, you could support me on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and Vimeo and LinkedIn. That's all that I could think of. And the music on Spotify and YouTube and Google's and Amazon and YouTube, iTunes. There's so many. Anyway, I'm everywhere. I love you. Mwah. Have a good night. Take care. Sweet dreams. See you. Bye.
Would you like to be touched by an angel? Then subscribe to onlyfans.com/Cherie777, where you'll enjoy the most exquisite art, music, photos, videos, where fantasies, dreams, illusions, and mirage are all merged together. Subscribe now and enjoy the world beyond your imagination.